Today we're at the window of St. Therese of Lisieux, or as she's more affectionately called, and as we see in this window, the Little Flower. She's dressed in the Carmelite habit, similar to what she would have worn as a Carmelite nun, and in her hands we also see some flowers, and we also see the crucifix. And we'll say why that's important in a few moments. St. Therese of Lisieux was born on the 2nd of January in the year 1873, and she was born as Marie Francois, maybe my languages, Marie Francois Therese Martin. She was the youngest of all the children in her family. There were all girls in her family, and her parents were very religious, and they made sure to instill the faith deeply within all the children. And so her father was named Louis Martin, and he was a watchmaker. Her mother was named Zélie Martin. They were both such devout Catholics that before they got married, her father actually attempted to join a monastery. He was refused because of his lack of Latin. And her mother, she also tried to join an order of nuns, and she was also refused. So providentially, they were brought together to wed in the Holy Sacrament of marriage. Both of them, both Marie and Louis and Zélie, were beatified on the 19th of October in the year 2008. When St. Teresa was only 4 years old, her mother would go on to pass. And that was obviously a very sorrowful moment for her and her entire family. And so her father takes St. Teresa and also all the other children in her family, and they move to Lisieux, and that's where she gets acquainted with the Carmelite monastery that she would eventually join. When you read most autobiographies, or most biographies about her, would often say that she was the favorite of all the children in her family, and she was also very spoiled by her sister, by her father. She would lead a very spoiled life. She was known to throw temper tantrums, and she would do other sorts of things like that. It was sometime early in life that she was diagnosed with a nervous disorder, and she said that she was healed by grace by the smile of Our Lady. Her religious side was also very present from a young age, even though she was spoiled, even though she did throw those temper tantrums. She was also very religious by nature. When her sister Celine made her first Holy Communion, she said it was one of the most beautiful days of my entire life. When she was only 9 years old, her sister Pauline, who she would affectionately call her second mother after her mom had passed, that sister Pauline would go on to join the Carmelite monastery. That was a very sad time for her, and that also prompted in her a desire to want to join Carmel also. In the year 1886, she received what she called her Christmas miracle. She said that's when she had her complete conversion. She would go on to be healed from her hypersensitivity, and she would go on, as Pope Benedict XVI said, she would go on to run as a giant. When she was only 14 years old, there was a criminal who was impenitent and who was going to be put to death. And she took his cause so seriously that she began to pray fervently for him. She said, I wanted at all costs to prevent him from going to hell. At the age of 14, she gets the courage to finally speak with her father about joining the Carmelite monastery. And she's very nervous about doing this, and she writes in her autobiography, how was I to talk to him about letting go of his queen, who had just sacrificed his eldest ones? What inner struggles I suffered before feeling the courage to talk about it. In order to make my great revelation, I chose the day of Pentecost. All day I pleaded with the apostles to pray for me, to inspire me the words I was going to have to say. Through my tears, I confided in him my desire to enter Carmel. Then his tears began mingling with my own, but he didn't say a word to turn me away from my vocation, being content simply to point out that I was still too young to make such a serious determination. But I defended my cause so well that with Papa's simple and upright nature, he was soon convinced that my desire was that of God. In his great faith, he cried out that God was giving him a great honor to ask him for his children in this way. So her first hurdle was accomplished, and now she thought she would just smoothly be able to enter Carmel, so she goes to her sister who's in the Carmelite monastery, and she speaks with her about this. And very upsetting to her, she's told she can't enter Carmel till she's 21 years old. And so, St. Teresa of Lisieux, she always had a confidence about what she was about, and so she wasn't content to wait till that age. So she goes with her father and they speak to the parish priest in Lisieux, trying to get him to allow her to enter Carmel. She was received very coldly by them. Again, she's not going to stop there, because she does have this confidence. So with her father, she makes an appointment with the bishop, and they go to speak with the bishop, and as they're speaking with the bishop, she's trying to convince him to let her enter Carmel, and the bishop just says, spend time with your father. He needs your help at home. Spend time there and see what happens in the future. Her father then pleads with the bishop also, saying, allow Teresa to enter Carmel, allow her to become a Carmelite nun. All that was to no avail. She wasn't given permission. Then in the year 1887, St. Teresa, along with her father and one of her sisters, they're going on pilgrimage to Rome, and they're going because it was Pope Leo XIII, the anniversary of his priestly ordination, so many people were going to Rome to honor him on that day. And as they're going there, they have a private audience, and they're kneeling before the Holy Father, and they're simply told, don't say anything, kneel before the Holy Father, and receive a blessing. Again, St. Teresa, in her humble confidence, as she's kneeling before the Holy Father, she says, Most Holy Father, I have a great grace to ask of you. Most Holy Father, in honor of your jubilee, allow me to enter Carmel at age 15. Pope Leo then says to her, well, my child, do what your superiors tell you. St. Teresa is not going to be content with that, so she says, O most Holy Father, if you were to say yes, everyone would be willing. Pope Leo then says to her, you will enter if it's God's will. She said this was so crushing to her. She wrote a letter to her sister Pauline, and she says, I felt as if crushed to powder. I felt abandoned as I write to you. I could cry my heart out. But don't mind, God can't try me any more than I can bear. I am only the child Jesus, little ball. If he wants to smash his toy, he can do so. Yes, I want all and everything that he wants. About a year after her meeting with Pope Leo, she is eventually able to enter Carmel, and she's able to enter only at the age of 15. When she enters Carmel, she takes the name of Sister Therese of the Infant Jesus, and at a later point she adds of the Holy Face. So that's when she became known as Sister Teresa of the Infant Jesus of the Holy Faith. She lived a rather normal life with the sisters. Again, as we see with many saints, there was nothing that really seemed exceptional about her. Most people didn't perceive the depths of her spiritual life. In Carmel, it was very rigorous, the life that they led. They would get up every morning at 4:45 in the morning. They would go to bed at 11 p.m. They would pray for 7 hours, and then they would do manual labor for 5 hours. And even the manual labor that they did, that was also done in solitude. Her postulancy lasted about 9 months, and then she would eventually go on to take the Carmelite habit, and she would also take the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Her spiritual life was very rigorous, even though many of the sisters didn't perceive it. Even during her recreation, which was just the time when they could be with the other sisters, and they wouldn't be praying, they wouldn't be working, they would just be simply with one another. Even during that time, her spiritual life was manifest because she would always sit with the sister who was the most disagreeable. She wasn't content just to be in her recreational time, just to be a little, doing a little less. She even used that as a spiritual opportunity. The Mother Superior said of her, mystical as she was in the chapel and at work, she is equally communal and full of fun during recreation, which when she makes our sides split laughing. So she obviously, in her recreation, even though she was this great mystical person, she was also obviously someone who, was still able to have community and was still able to have fun. Her father, sometime after she was in the convent, her father would go on to have a number of strokes, which would leave him mentally incapable, and he would have to go on to live in an institution, and he would never recover from that, and he would eventually pass from that. After his passing, the last of the Martin sisters goes on to join the convent also. In 1896, on Good Friday, she woke up to found blood in her mouth. And at this point, she was praying that she could go on mission to Vietnam. She wanted to be a mission sister in Vietnam, and the missions were always something that were important to her. She prayed very fervently for the mission, all doing missionary activity, and she prayed very fervently for priests. Because of this blood, obviously, she wasn't able to go on any mission. It was some time after that she would also go on to contract tuberculosis, which would ultimately be the cause of her death. During this time, she went through what many spiritual authors call the dark night of the soul, where they feel spiritually abandoned by God. She said about that time, God allowed my soul to be overrun by an impenetrable darkness, which made the thought of heaven hitherto so welcome. And this trial was not to last for a matter of a few days or a few weeks. I got tired of the darkness all around me. Death will make nonsense of your hopes. It will only mean a night darker than ever. And even in this dark night of the soul, this spiritual abandonment period, she still believed, obviously, in heaven. She even said, heaven, the Sunday where the sun never sets on the homeland. Most people know St. Teresa of Lisieux from her spiritual autobiography, which is now called The Story of a Soul. And she wrote that because her superiors, as they started to sense something exceptional about her, they asked her to write about her childhood. That was so well received by her superior that they asked her after a retreat to write about the experience at the retreat, and then during her suffering, they also asked her to write during that time. She titled the book Springtime Story of a Little White Flower, written by herself and dedicated to Reverend Mother Mary Agnes of Jesus. So that's where we get the most information about St. Teresa, was from her own writings. She would go on to be canonized with remarkable speed. She was canonized by Pope Pius XI in the year 1925, and in 1927, this nun who never left the Carmelite monastery when she got there, she was proclaimed patron of all missionaries. And then the crowning achievement of everything she accomplished on earth, and now that she does in heaven, was when in 1997, by Pope John Paul II, she was made a doctor of the church. There's only 33 doctors of the church, and only 3 are women. We have St. Teresa of Lisieux, it was in 1997, and then we also have St. Catherine of Siena and St. Teresa of Avila. So obviously this Carmelite nun had such an impact on the church that Pope John Paul would proclaim her a doctor of the church. And he said in his homily that day, "Everyone thus realizes that today something surprising is happening. St. Teresa of Lisieux was unable to attend a university or engage in systematic study. She died young. Nevertheless, from this day forward, she will be honored as a doctor of the church, an outstanding recognition which raises her in the esteem of the entire Christian community, far beyond any academic title. Indeed, when the magisterium proclaims someone a doctor of the church, it intends to point out to all the faithful, particularly to those who perform in the church the fundamental service of preaching or of undertaking the delicate task of teaching and research, that the doctrine professed and proclaimed by a certain person can be a reference point, not only because it conforms to revealed truth, but also because it sheds new light on the mysteries of faith. Teresa of the Child Jesus and of the Holy Faith is the youngest of all the doctors of the church. But her ardent spiritual journey shows such maturity, and the insights of faith expressed in her writings are so vast and profound that they deserve a place among the great spiritual masters. When she died, which I did forget to mention, when she died, she was clutching a crucifix, which we see here, and her last words were, "I love him. My God, I love you." So love was obviously always something that was important to her. And we see, even as she's made, St. Teresa, one of the other kind of unique facets about her is she was always able to see some spiritual side, even in the most simplest of things. She saw an elevator at one point, and even in something as simple as an elevator, she was able to see spiritual significance. She said, "We're in an age of innovations. Now there is no more need to climb the steps of a staircase. In rich homes, there are elevators. They replace saints to great advantage. I would also like to find an elevator to lift me up to Jesus, because I'm so little to climb the rough staircase of perfection." St. Teresa was also aware that death was not going to be the end of her mission. She said, "I will spend my heaven doing good on earth." There's many places you can go to foster devotion to St. Teresa of Lisieux. There's obviously the Basilica in Lisieux, and if you're ever there, it's a beautiful place to go. You can visit her childhood home. You can also visit the Carmelite monastery where she spent some time, and that's where her bodies are, and there's obviously also a beautiful basilica there. The crypt church in Lisieux also contains the reliquary of her parents, Louis and Zélie, who are both again beatified. There's also the National Shrine and Museum of St. Teresa, which is in Illinois, and they have obviously a beautiful shrine church, and they also have many memorabilia in the museum there. They have a Carmelite center, spiritual center. They have beautiful gardens. They have a gift shop, Stations of the Cross. They have all kinds of things. You can also, if you want to pray to St. Teresa of Lisieux, you can also send them an online prayer request. There is also the National Shrine of St. Teresa in Juneau, Alaska. And St. Teresa of Lisieux was also the patron saint of Alaska. And so the reason that church came about was because there was a Jesuit priest who had a dream, and from that dream sprang this beautiful shrine. They have a shrine chapel, they have stations of the cross, they have a rosary trail. It's kind of far away, so they have lodging, they have a gift shop. A little closer to home, there is a beautiful Carmelite monastery, which I've been to a number of times, which is in Philadelphia, and there you can visit a beautiful chapel where the nuns pray, and they also have a small gift shop where you can get some stuff. There's some wonderful books. And there's also the first shrine ever to be dedicated to St. Teresa was in Rhode Island, and that shrine still continues to be in existence. Again, she called herself, she said, in her autobiography, she first titled it The Story of a Little Flower. That's why we see the roses. Oftentimes when people pray to St. Therese, if they do a novena is a 9-day time of prayer where you pray for a particular intention. So often people will, receive roses when they make a novena to her. And they see that as just confidence that she's granting a request. So if you ever pray a novena, you may get the roses, you may not. It's not dependent upon that. Some books that are helpful, obviously her feast day is on October 1st. So these are the ones that we have in the parish library that you can always get, and all of these you can either buy from the publishers or you can buy, of course, from Amazon. Butler's Lives of the Saints has a lot of information, and again, her feast day is on October 1st. Most important is what she actually composed, which is called The Story of the Soul. This one's published by the, let's see if I can find it, by the Carmelite, it's the ICS translation, I guess the Institute for Carmelite Studies. I prefer that because they seem to be very faithful. They're Carmelites and they're publishing Carmelite writings, so that seems to be the best translation I ever find. Again, that's called Story of a Soul. She also composed what were her last conversations. Much easier to read, they're just small little quotes about stuff that she said in her final years when she was going through such a period of sickness. This is also very spiritually edifying. It's called Maurice and Therese. There were two priests that she spiritually adopted, and she would write letters between herself and this priest, and these are all the letters that they composed to each other. These are just some other biographies that we have in the parish library. One is called Fire of Love, Praying with St. Teresa of Lisieux. I haven't read that, I'm sure it's worthwhile, and I haven't read this one either. The Fearless Trust of St. Teresa of Lisieux, Holy Daring. Again, all these you can get them anytime from the library. These are probably my two other favorites that I didn't see over there. This first one is called I Believe in Love, and this was a series of meditations that a French priest gave on the spirituality of St. Teresa of Lisieux. It's excellent. I read it some time ago and was very impressed with it. Wonderful, wonderful. Many people have read it and been edified by it. It's called I Believe in Love. If you like something a little simple, this is from Ignatius Press, and they have a whole bunch of these on different saints. It's called Sermon in a Sentence, and this volume is on St. Teresa of Lisieux. And again, all it is basically a sermon in a sentence. They go through the rosary, they say what mystery of the rosary we're on, and then they just have these one-line quotes from St. Teresa of Lisieux. So that's all we have. She's always been one of my favorite saints. My mom actually has a first-class relic of her, so I was able to venerate that. When I was in Lisieux, I was able to venerate her relics there also. She's a wonderful intercessor in heaven, so if you have some time, maybe get to know her in heaven, and also pray to her, maybe through a novena. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.